Where do you think leaders most often miscalculate AI ROI? Is it infrastructure, change management, or expectation?
I think if they're focused on ROI right now, they're already making a mistake.
What risks emerge in 2026 when accessibility is treated as a later or last priority in AI initiatives?
It all does come back to the same thing. Part of it is Title II is coming up, which increases the requirements for accessibility. So there's definitely a lot of risk when it comes to, regulatory and lawsuits.
Why is inclusive design essential for AI systems scaling globally in 2026? Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of PureLogics Pulse, a podcast powered by PureLogics, where we explore technology trends, product innovation, and digital transformation. PureLogics is a full-service technology partner helping enterprises and startups drive digital transformation, build next-generation software products, and scale AI-powered solutions that create real business impact. I'm Mohsin Ali, and I spearhead the AI initiatives here at PureLogics. Joining us today is Joe Devon, who builds AI systems that don't just scale, they last. As the founder of A11Y Audits and the co founder of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, he is disrupting the culture of technology to ensure accessibility is a core requirement, not an afterthought. Joe's career is a blueprint for high stakes digital infrastructure, from scaling American Idol to building a variety of voting systems for reality shows. He is an AI futurist who knows that in a world driven by data, a system is only as strong as its most vulnerable user. We're stripping away the buzzwords to discuss understanding AI in 2026, the reality and lessons for C-level leaders. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing great, and thank you for inviting me to the pod.
Tell us a bit about yourself and your journey.
Sure. Well, I'm old enough now to have had a long variety of careers, from building businesses in Eastern Europe when Russia was opened up, to working for a search engine company, to working for AmericanIdol.com, to now getting really involved in AI. And I'd say the thing I'm best known for is creating Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which has grown. In the first few years, it hit an audience of 220 million users, and then we just stopped counting because it was freaking us out too much. And then that led to big tech companies celebrating the day, changing their homepages. And then I'd say the culmination really was 2024, when the White House called me up 2 weeks before the day and said, "Will you come to the White House and speak, because we're doing a celebration here?" So that's the headline.
That's a phenomenal initiative at your end, and I hope you receive even more recognition that you really deserve. Let's talk about the AI investment paradox. AI is all the rage these days. Where do you think leaders most often miscalculate AI ROI? Is it infrastructure, change management, or expectation?
I think if they're focused on ROI right now, they're already making a mistake, because AI changes the game. And what they really need to be focused on is business model disruption. They should not only reread Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, but keep up to date with some of his more recent articles, where he kind of pivoted a little bit, or let's say added the concept of business model disruption. And what's not well known is in 2016, Google, they officially, Sundar Pichai, who everybody said fell behind on AI, in 2016 already, he officially announced that Google is pivoting to AI. But right in the building at Google, Clayton Christensen comes in and he gives a speech, and people are talking about, engineers in the audience were telling him, well, how is this going to affect jobs on the outside? And his assumption was that the jobs that it would affect would be other people, and that Google was ahead of the game. And he warned them right there, and he said, Google is ahead of the game on so many things, but they're not aware of business model disruption, which came true when ChatGPT came out, and they stumbled initially with Bard, and eventually kind of figured it out. And so far, they seem to be doing quite well. They're certainly positioned to do well in AI, but the business disruption was really real.
Perfect. You talked about looking at the AI in the long term or evaluating its impact in the long term as well. What's a more realistic way for C suites to think about AI returns beyond just short term cost saving measures?
Yeah, and I'm glad I had a second now because now I remembered what I wanted to say, and it
Mhm.
will relate. I'll relate it back to your question. Clayton Christensen initially in the Innovator's Dilemma, the way he said that innovation disrupts established companies is that newer entrants come in at the lower end of the market, and the enterprise companies, they are worried about their margins and protecting their cash cows, and they will give up that lower end of the market if they can't keep the margins. That allows the new entrant in, and then the new entrant starts to climb up in the value chain and then eventually becomes a big competitor. And that was what was happening for Kodak, which went bankrupt, and all of these old school companies. But Google was, they studied, the innovator's dilemma, and they solved it in a way because they gave everything away for free.
Mm.
So if you are trying to do search or Gmail, you're trying to compete with those products. How do you compete with free?
Mm.
Right? They turned into an ad-supported model. So they kind of cut off the whole concept that Christensen came in with. But business model disruption was a way to disrupt the market and can have an impact on businesses. And so what's going on right now in AI and how you need to think, if you're in the C-suite, the way that you need to think about AI returns is that AI changes the business market to wartime. So what happens by definition, if you're an enterprise company, you had a founder who built a company, found product market fit, and then you needed to scale it. And in order to scale it, you needed the CFOs to come in and the operators who scale the business, worry about margin, and typically that's when the founders get bored because they're visionaries and they leave the companies or they become less active. And so the enterprises tend to be operator led with peacetime CEOs. And now we're at wartime. So you need a wartime CEO that first of all tries to evaluate the market, because now there are a few aspects to AI that change the game. One of them is that software development the cost is nearing zero. So right now, if your product or service is based on the software that you created, you can now see a lot of other entrants come in because software development is so much cheaper. So as a wartime CEO, you have to be looking at, well, Jeff Bezos said, your margin is my opportunity. And his entire business with Amazon was created on those tiny little margins and using volume in order to become a giant, and then just taking out one business after the other. So you have to worry, is your business now vulnerable to the fact that you can be disrupted by software development being so cheap? Is that going to eat at your margins? So that's one side of it. But you also need that visionary leader in your organization to be elevated so that they can look at, there's another book called Blue Ocean Strategy, which is looking at the blue ocean where there is no market. So if you are today an AI native company, they could nip at your heels with either eating at your margins or taking a blue ocean, meaning a new market that will disrupt what you're doing, and then your customers might go to them. So you need that visionary leadership to be, first of all, reading all of these books on business transformation and innovation, and thinking about how to protect yourself and how to come into new markets. Did I say all of that clearly? Is there any question there or any
Fantastic. That
clarification?
was very eloquently put. And that's something that I've considered before, but it hasn't been as crystal clear to me as you've just described it. So you've described it perfectly, where most enterprises treated AI as a technology initiative. They should instead be focusing on dealing with AI as a business product and in the innovation space or the disruption space. And as you mentioned, that CEOs need to be more wartime CEOs rather than peacetime CEOs. That's a fantastic analogy, I think. Speaking about vulnerabilities. You presented the case for companies to try to limit their vulnerabilities or limit their margins, so where do fragmented workflows and legacy systems quietly sabotage AI scale? And how does accumulated tech debt change the AI equation for large enterprises?
I actually think that AI can be very helpful for fragmented workflows, and being the glue to the legacy systems. Before I go into a bit of detail there, let's start with you need to make sure that you've got good data hygiene to begin with. Or do you understand, first of all, what unique value, what unfair competitive advantage do you have? And all of that, do you have that written down in the right kind of data warehouse that can be used to train your own AI models and have a competitive advantage that no one else has because you're building your AI models internally? But before you even think about building AI models internally, you need to understand from your organization what your data looks like, what your advantages are, and make sure that you are prepared, which I would say 99% of organizations are not prepared. So that is step one. But in terms of the fragmented workflows, you're probably familiar with what's gone viral in the last couple of weeks, ClaudeBot, aka OpenClaw, right? Everybody's been talking about it, but if you follow Peter Steinberger closely and how he built it, there was one insight that he had that is really relevant here, and that powered OpenClaw, and that is that APIs were great until the age of AI. That was core, right? And then in order to allow the systems to talk to each other, Anthropic created MCP servers, which had their moment. And then a bunch of devs were like, I hate MCP servers, mostly because they were poorly implemented. If you implement it well, it's actually still a great technology. But Steinberger said, oh, you know what? Let us build something different, which is CLIs, command line interfaces. And a lot of the secret sauce behind what he built is that, I'll give you one example, Gmail. You're able to control your Gmail by talking to your phone on Discord or Telegram. You can pick up your email, see what's going on, because he created a command line interface that talks to Gmail. And so those command line interfaces have a very clear boundaries, a very clear protocol of how you find out what it does. You do the -- help, the name of the command line, -- help, and it tells you how to speak to it. So it's like an API, but so much better, and then can serve as glue. So you can embed credentials inside a CLI, you can hide it in a secrets file, you can access APIs through it, you can access websites through it, you can access your internal systems through it. I'm working with several companies in their HR departments because there's a lot of well-known software in HR, but there are well-known gaps too that are right now being manual. And so this is where it can help a legacy system, because we're going in with a CLI that's bridging the gap and automating the pieces that are not yet automated, right? And just being able to make all of what the systems that they are now using do, make it more comprehensive. And so that is where I think the glue can help with those fragmented workflows.
I really enjoyed how you walked us through all of the technologies. It's not even about decades or years anymore. It's about months, MCP had its moment, I think, less than a year ago. And
Yeah.
I remember how many applications in every coding competition were based on MCP solutions, how many products were MCP based. It just brought me back to that moment in time. I enjoy implementing MCPs as well, but they have their time and place,
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem that they had is that they exposed their interface, eating up all this context window, even when you didn't use the MCP server, and they needed to just expose one entry point and hide everything under there. And that context rot is what caused the problem. But if it's built well, the reason it's so good is that you don't have to create one MCP server for Claude, one for Codex, one for Cursor, one for Windsurf. That one MCP server could could be, work for all of them. So that's why it's still useful. But you put a CLI on top of that, you don't have to worry about any of it.
Absolutely, and I think with your argument about CLI, or with the information that you provided on CLI, it's so important to strike that balance between high level and low level abstraction. So you talked about using these sort of tools in automating the redundant parts of HR workflows. There's a certain level of balance you have to strike, wherewith it's not too high level. So the only users that can probably use it are non-technical users, and it doesn't have to be too low level, so it's not accessible to anybody at all. So that the secret sauce that you mentioned, I think that spun the gears in my head. So moving on to the adoption of AI in business, and as business leaders, a huge problem that I feel organizations face is identifying and upskilling AI talent. What challenges do you identify there?
This is hilarious. I will never forget this. I was invited to the chief, well, what do they call it again? There's a term for this, but there's an officer that basically kind of manages the C-suite and underneath. And I was invited to help this legacy organization modernize. And we sat there, and I brought in a whole panel of innovative experts, and they said, or what are you doing in order to encourage innovation in your company with your employees, with their side projects? And then as soon as he said that, the head of HR cracked up laughing, and everybody's like, what? She said, oh, well, we definitely have no idea what their side projects are, because we have very strong legal language telling them that any side project they work on, we own their IP. So there's no way we have any idea who's doing innovation in the company. And so right now, you have got a ton of shadow AI in the organization where people are using AI, and you have this very difficult trade-off that you have to deal with, a dilemma, which is, if you're too lax on your AI policies, you're going to have open claw all over your organization in a very insecure way. But if you're too strict in your policies, then they're still going to do it anyway. It's going to be hidden. And the worst part of it is that you won't be able to identify who in your organization is good at AI, because they're in hiding. So your AI experts are hiding. So you actually need to be very thoughtful and creative in terms of building up that AI internal expertise. You can't easily buy this, because it's just like who is on the bleeding edge and who is playing with it and who isn't. And that could be internal, external. And you really should find out who in your organization actually has both the domain expertise of your business, because they're your employees, and also have been playing with AI. You need to find ways to elevate them. So that should be the center of your policy. And then bring in vendors who, depending on your situation, you might bring in vendors to identify what's going on in the organization. Because when you do digital disruption, in my experience, there are leaders that know exactly what they have to do, but they can't necessarily or don't know how to get that to the senior leadership, to like the C level. And very often you're coming in as an outside vendor, just validating what the smartest leaders are saying the exact same thing that they got pushed down when it was said internally, and you're bringing it in externally, and it's like, oh, that's a great idea, right? And then the leaders who kind of help direct you to it are thankful that their initiatives are getting pushed, but also frustrated that nobody listened to them when they said it internally. So that's very often what the outside vendor does. And very often I can't tell you how many times, like, you introduce somebody from one division to another. You two should know each other. The stuff that you're doing impacts each other, and they don't even know that person exists. It's mind-blowing.
That's a fantastic segue into what I wanted to ask you next. As someone who provides these services, how would you advise C-suite leaders to engage vendors in order to scale enterprise AI? Can you explain it to a thought leader, or how vendors help them scale?
This is a difficult one because every business is different, right? So you have to start with the conversation. I've been thinking of offering a new service of just educating leaders on what are the new developments going on, because it's happening so quickly that you really need just to have a regular meetings. Hey, this is what's going on. Here is OpenClaw, right? There are about 3, 4, 5 other people doing work as interesting as great as Peter's work is, as interesting as what he did, but it's very different and less accessible to the end user. And so people don't know what they're doing as well. But the agent swarms are where it's at right now. You have swarms of agents doing all kinds of work. And if you're very good at architecture, you can build it in a way that it works really well. But you need somebody that's in the weeds and that knows how to speak to leadership to present it to them. And then another thing that you really need to think about, and I don't know if this is through a vendor or through just internally your tech leadership, you need to evolve what your sprints look like, right? Because you have an entire methodology, agile methodology. It's all changing now. Everybody uses GitHub, but nobody's looking at code anymore. So what is the GitHub of tomorrow? You have to figure out what that is too. So one thing that I'm seeing, some friends who come in and they have their initial meeting with the leaders talking about potential new businesses. And while they're talking, he's sitting there on Claude Code and he whips out a proof of concept by the end of the meeting. And I'm now advising another group, and what we're doing with the client is at the beginning of every sprint planning session, we've got a POC of what we're talking about doing in that sprint. So it's already, in some cases, very workable, where you feel like the work is almost finished. And in other cases, it's just like, okay, this is more or less what it will look like. And then you're able to get approval from some people that need to see it interact before you're done. So the entire concept of the sprint needs to be reevaluated and rebuilt from the ground up. So that's something that you can go to vendors to do, or it's something that you should do internally. But the world is changing. Oh, and now I remember the other thing I wanted to say earlier. You have to think of AI as a different beast. So in the history of technology, what software development did is it was very deterministic. So you come in and you are trying to solve a problem and you put in X, Y inputs and you'll always get Z outputs. Very deterministic, very reliable. InfoSec problems are very clear. But now you can layer in intelligence, non-deterministic intelligence to every aspect of your business. That's what AI is doing. Software development is the first field that has been impacted by it in a big way, but this is something that can and will be done in every single department. So what does it look like when you have a human-like process that you can create hundreds, millions of them helping you do things? You're still going to need the humans, right? They still have to be in the loop, but they're overseeing your ability to scale everything by having this intelligence for X dollars to do more work.
Absolutely. And I'm just excited about the opportunity for AI enablement to cross from software domains into the physical domain. So you talked about it impacting software development in a major way. Once it sets foot into the physical world, we don't even know what its potential is going to look like.
Yeah,
so definitely,
that's scary. When the robots can do everything we can do, I'm very worried about that.
And
Yeah.
when you described sprint structures being having to be revised, I think immediately an alarm bell rang off in my head, where I thought, out of every 10 people that adopt this, 8 of them are going to be focusing on shortening sprints and shortening them to an extent where it's untenable. So there's a lot of responsibility that goes into restructuring how these things have taken shape. So agile methodology that's taken shape over many, many, many years. Now it's being forced to change in the span of maybe 2 years.
Yeah, and I mean, where I think it's going to go is you have these organizations that have their tickets, right? And the tickets include new features that all of these um, different clients have different needs, and so they all have all of these feature requests, and you're very deliberate and takes a long time to do it now, but I imagine the future is going to look like code forked all over the place, where every client gets their own version of your software and they can get whatever fixes they want. And what you really want is probably a human, uh, at the top of that, seeing which new features are working, which aren't working, and what parts of it should be brought into the main code base. But the entire the entire way we've been doing things is just overnight different.
Absolutely. And speaking about Clawbot that you mentioned, for the average user, I would describe it in a way where it's an AI agent that has autonomous access or agency over your whole system. It has access to all of your system. So that opens another Pandora box, which is trust. Although it's capable, where the problems lie is how much can you trust it? And the question then is, will trust or capability decide how far AI scales by 2026?
First of all, it's important to understand, at least for techies, to understand where the security risk is here. And Simon Willison wrote something called the lethal trifecta, where, let's see if I can remember all of it. If you are giving access to your private data, the ability to communicate to the outside world, and outside access to your systems. So what that means is you've got Gmail, right? And in that Gmail, you could have a malicious actor sending you a scam email that tells the AI that it should take your credit card, for example, and then email it to that person and then delete that sent email so you don't even know that this happened, right? And the reason that this is going to be a big problem for years to come is that AI systems don't have a way to separate out untrusted data from trusted data. So you can try to build some systems that detect it, but again, it's non-deterministic, so it's impossible to completely eradicate this problem if you are providing those three levels of access. And I'm sure I did not do it justice, so please just Google or use AI to ask it what lethal trifecta is. And then in terms of trust, in terms of how far AI scales, I mean, AI is scaling beyond our ability to absorb it. So that's going to continue in 2026, no matter what we do. But in terms of your organization, there's a huge cultural issue that you really need to think about if you're a leader, which is if you are focused on how AI is going to save you money and figure out how it can replace your most difficult cost, because employees are not only a very high cost, but they also have an impact on the organization in a lot of ways, because you have legal that tie your hands on a large variety of issues, and people don't realize how big an impact legal has on the leadership. And if you're an employee, you might view that what I just said very negatively. But if you've ever been on the other side of it, I'll give you one example. We had one employee that showed up to the interview, did a really good job, and then joined the organization. But the person that showed up is different than the person that interviewed. And what do you do with somebody like that is you don't even want to pay them a penny. You don't want to allow them in there. And the lawyers told us that we have to pay them 2 weeks and treat them like any regular employee that that gets laid off or fired. And so those are the kind of situations that you just don't understand if you haven't gone through. So very often leadership loves to get rid of their headcount, but the people are your organization. And if they know that you're chomping at the bit to reduce your headcount, what's going to happen is you're going to have a culture of fear in the organization, and then that's going to limit your scale. Whereas if you realize that and focus on the blue ocean strategy where you're saying, okay, I'm going to enter new markets, I'm going to upskill my organization and do that with transparency and let them know we're not trying to get, reduce headcount. On the contrary, we're trying to give you more interesting things to do. We're trying to build a bigger organization with this new technology, and we want your help doing it. You're going to build a culture that is probably rare because almost every organization is right now, including big tech, they're laying off people in large numbers. If you remove that layer of fear, you're going to build a much better culture, and now your opportunities are going to grow. So it's really about, what is your mindset with AI? Are you yes, cover your downside risk, but look at it as a visionary with all the opportunities to do wonderful new things with it.
Absolutely. And there's a huge opportunity for upskilling in it for the employees as well. Because there are multiple layers to implementing an effective AI system. One's transparency, the other is human oversight and inclusive oversight. So you need the employees to be there in order to provide oversight. You need the DevOps person, you need the backend and the front end person to provide necessary oversight. You can't scale a POC. You need it to go into development. You need it to enter the production stage. Only then can it become a product. So there's massive opportunity for organizations to remove that layer of fear. So instead of, presenting it as AI versus the employee, you could say an AI aided employee, and that probably helps your case a lot.
Yeah, but you have to mean it. Like if people can see through. If you're just saying that, like, I was at an organization with an AI title, and the CEO went out and just kept saying how, you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by someone that uses AI. And I'm like, everybody's saying that. Nobody believes it. It's all BS. and then I got laid off, right? So, which, I'm not saying that in a negative way, in the sense that the organization was actually disrupted by AI. The entire field was disrupted by AI. So I have no hard feelings about it. It's just business reality. But like, transparency, just be straight up. If you're if you're planning to get rid of the employees, don't tell them that kind of nonsense, because they don't buy it. They know
it's such a tricky thing to navigate with the pace at which everything's moving. Let's talk about accessibility again. Let's talk about inclusion and opportunity again. So in 2026, how does accessibility still get overlooked in enterprise AI deployments?
I think that a lot of people are looking at, let's say, the change in, without getting into politics, the change in administration. There's less of a focus on accessibility. It was actually a big focus of the previous administration. And so a lot of people are viewing that as an excuse to reduce their expenditure when it comes to accessibility. And it's a big shame, because if you look at the WHO's numbers on disability, there's 1.3 people with a disability, the way they define it, which I will argue, believe it or not, is undercounting not necessarily disability. They do have a good definition for it, but it's undercounting how many people are impacted by accessibility. And what I mean by that is that, and let me finish the statistic first. So there's about 1.3 billion people with a disability. There's 1.4 billion people in China. And everybody knows how big the Chinese market is, and somehow they're not quite computing how big the disability market is. But it's even bigger than that when you think about it, because if you look at millennials are age 30 to 45. So the oldest millennials are in their 40s. In your 40s, you start to develop a couple of conditions where your eyesight is not as good. So you need higher color contrast, bigger fonts, and your hearing starts to go down. So you tend to need captions more, which even the younger generation is needing captions more because they're sitting there on their phones all the time. And so accessibility is a field that understands all these variety of issues, and it will make your software better when you have that accessibility department that just is about user experience and making it better for a larger group of people. But when you're looking at the demographics now, the median age in the United States today is 39 years old. Essentially, half of your audience has some accessibility needs. And according to the WHO, I'm not 100% sure of these stats because I got them from an AI, but 2030, the median age is supposed to grow to 60. That sounds very high to me, so let's take it with a grain of salt. But for sure, in America, as well as most parts of the world, the population is aging. And with an aging population, that means more and more accessibility issues come up. And you're going to all of a sudden care about accessibility, whether you know it or not. So you might as well start now. Whereas if you're focused only on legislation, you're missing out on the opportunity of making your products better for everyone.
Absolutely. And presenting it statistically with numbers, with facts, at least with an idea of the facts, it helps shape the conversation from with the fast-paced environment that we're in. Everyone's focusing on survival of the fittest. It shifts the focus on inclusivity as opposed to having the innate capability to be able to deal with this change. So now the inclusivity comes into the design of things. So, why is inclusive design essential for AI systems scaling globally in 2026?
I mean, it's essentially what I said. Your audience, 50% are needed, and those numbers are going to grow. And by the way, as I rethink that, there's no way that you went from a median of 39 to 60. So that's why I was kind of didn't feel right as I was saying it, but that's just what the AI came back with. But still, the numbers are huge. But what I would like to say about this is, for decades, accessibility was an afterthought. People with disabilities was an afterthought. And it took about 2 decades to start to build systems for people with disabilities. And with mobile, it got slightly better, but not a lot better. And now we've got an opportunity with AI to make it accessible to begin with, as opposed to letting it be an afterthought. And in some respects, AI is very helpful because it allows you to create much better automated closed captions, for example. People with a variety of disabilities, because of the transformer technology that underpins LLMs, is really good at translation. Now, for example, and there's so many different kinds of abilities that people don't even think about. I have aphantasia, which you can sort of think of as a mild version of blindness in the mind's eye. And what that means is I don't visualize very well. If you tell me the common thing is an apple, how do you visualize an apple? I see a black nothing. That's all I see when I visualize. I can't really visualize anything. So it's blindness in the mind's eye. So I love reading, I love science fiction, but then you get to these authors that are going page after page describing a spaceship, describing costumes, and it's so boring, right? So now I can take any kind of content and just transform it and then tell the AI, I have aphantasia. Can you make this, can you remove the visualization and help me understand the point? So it's just like a crazy example to show you that accessibility goes beyond just your regular thought of disability. There's just a wide variety of abilities, and being able to translate is very helpful if you have ADHD or other kind of neurodivergent conditions. And so that's very helpful. But what is not great is that the AI coding models are very often inaccessible. And so the GAAD Foundation, in partnership with ServiceNow, we created a benchmark for accessibility because we realized that the AI model companies compete on their benchmarks. So they needed to have a benchmark to show how well they do when it comes to accessibility. And it was no surprise to me that OpenAI performed very well, but I was very disappointed that Anthropic, which is the company that leads with their ethics and caring about people, really did mediocre. And their latest Opus 4.6 model is third to last in the benchmark, But what was really, really disappointing is Google with their Gemini 3.0 Pro, which is their flagship model, came in 37 of 37. Clearly, it's either I had a conversation with an accessibility leader yesterday, and the way he put it was, it's either like they don't care or they don't care yet. They've got so much going on. If you want to give the benefit of the doubt, they've got so much going on because it's wartime that accessibility is coming last again. And we don't want to let that happen. We want to make sure that they do pay attention to it. And honestly, I think that one of the reasons that the OpenAI models do so well, and if you're a developer, you know that the Codex models are actually better at coding than Claude Code. Claude Code is great to talk to, but the code it writes is not as thorough or not as good as the Codex models. And I think that one of the benefits is that they have engaged with a lot of disability organizations, including Be My Eyes and some others. And so that paying attention to accessibility just makes their product so much more usable. And I think that that's one of their advantages. And it's something I'd like the other foundation model companies to think about. Well, maybe we should put some resources into this because people care, people notice, and you'll have a better product.
Absolutely. And this is such an important conversation for us to have. I didn't even consider how you would use ChatGPT in this case, like you described with yours, with the Aphantasia. And it's such an important conversation to have at this stage as well, where everything's moving so quickly. We're just talking about adoption, but we're not talking about ubiquitous adoption for everyone. So what risks emerge in 2026 when accessibility is treated as a later or last priority in AI initiatives?
It all does come back to the same thing. Part of it is, Title II is coming up, which increases the requirements for accessibility. So there's definitely a lot of risk when it comes to, regulatory and lawsuits. And unfortunately, that is very frequently the number one consideration that C-suite has. But again, it also comes back to you're leaving your customers out. So if your customer can't use your product, they'll just use a different product. And that's why it's great that there's competition and that there are people that are paying attention to accessibility. It just makes your product better. So you risk losing out to your competitor.
Absolutely. And as we close today's conversation, one thing stands out. In 2026, AI success isn't defined by how advanced the system's capabilities have become, but by how responsibly and inclusively they scale. For C-level leaders, the real lesson is this: AI isn't technology investment, it's an organizational commitment to trust, to accessibility, to transparency, and to building systems that work for all users, not just the majority. Because ultimately, AI doesn't fail at the cutting edge. It fails at the human experience side of things. And the organizations that recognize this will be the ones that are going to have products that truly last. Joe, thank you for sharing your perspective and your work. You're doing amazing work to increase inclusivity within technology.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to share. And I do a lot of podcasts, but this was your questions were very different than anything I usually get. So I really enjoyed it.
I hope they were different in a positive way.
Oh yeah, no, I love it. I love this kind of conversation.
Perfect. And thank you to our listeners. Thank you for joining us on PureLogics Pulse. We'll see you in the next episode.